The boy stood at the bakery counter with snow clinging to his lashes, his tiny voice trembling as he asked, "Do you have any expired bread?" "Mommy hasn't eaten." He didn't see the man who had just stepped through the door, a single dad and CEO, freeze at the sound of those words, or how that moment would change all of their lives forever. The night of December 23rd was brutal, the kind of cold that scraped against skin and curled under clothes like a living thing. Snow swirled in thick white waves, each gust spinning through the streets of the small town with a ferocity that made even the streetlights seem dimmer. Their halos barely touched the sidewalks, leaving most of the world wrapped in icy darkness. But at the edge of the avenue, a bakery glowed like a fragile ember. The windows were fogged, lights soft and golden, the shelves dusted with the crumbs of a long day. A tired employee had just flipped the sign to closing soon when the door rattled softly. Outside, against the side wall of the bakery where the wind cut the hardest, a woman and her child sat huddled together. Leah Dawson leaned weakly against the brick, her fingers trembling violently where they clutched her thin coat tighter around her body. Her long, pale blonde hair was tangled from the storm. Her face, usually kind, warm, and gentle, had gone a sickly gray from hunger. She had not eaten in 2 days. Every bite she'd managed to find had gone to her son. Her breaths were shallow and thin, each one costing her more strength than she could spare. Beside her, 4-year-old Milo tried to make himself small against her side, shielding her from the wind with his little body. His coat was thin, sleeves frayed, and his hands were tucked into his armpits for warmth. Snowflakes dusted his eyelashes, but he didn't cry. He wasn't the kind of child who had tears left to waste. Instead, he forced a small, wobbly smile as he touched his mother's cheek with a freezing hand. "Mommy, you feel cold, are you okay?" Leah forced her lips upward, though they had nearly lost all color. "Mommy's fine," she whispered. "I'm not hungry." But her voice quivered, and Milo didn't believe her. He never did. Quietly, he tugged off the worn scarf around his neck and wrapped it around hers, clumsy fingers working with urgent determination. "You can have mine," he said simply. "I'm warm enough." She turned her face away as tears slid down her cheek and froze instantly. She didn't want him to see her breaking. She didn't want him to know how close she was to losing consciousness. But then, slowly, her head dropped back against the wall. Her eyes fluttered once, twice, then closed. "Mommy," Milo whispered. She didn't respond. His tiny hand shook as he pressed it against her cheek again. "Mommy, wake up, please wake up." His voice cracked. "Mommy." But snow kept falling. The world kept turning. The cold remained merciless. Milo wiped the blurring tears from his eyes and looked toward the glowing bakery window just feet away. Warmth. Food. Safety. Something he hadn't felt in far too long. He leaned forward, kissed his mother's cold hand, and whispered, "I'll be right back. I'll find something. I promise." His small boots slipped as he rose, his feet numb, but he caught himself on the wall and pushed through the biting wind, forcing his body toward the bakery door. The bell chimed as he pulled it open. Warm air hit him instantly, so foreign he nearly gasped. A young cashier looked up, startled at the sight of a shivering child, snow-soaked and trembling. "And Mommy hasn't eaten," Milo said quickly, breath puffing out in white clouds. "Do you have any expired bread? Or anything old? Even if you throw it away." The cashier froze, mouth open, unable to form a response. Before he could speak, the bell chimed again. A tall man entered, brushing snow from his dark coat. A little girl sat perched on his hip, bundled in a pink jacket. The man, Adrian West, paused immediately when he heard Milo's voice. He listened, every word carving into the air like a blade. "Mommy hasn't eaten in 2 days." The little boy wasn't looking at him. Milo stared at the window, to where a woman sat slumped in the snow. Adrian followed his gaze. His chest collapsed inward. It was the image that had haunted him for 2 years, the moment his wife had collapsed from exhaustion, illness, and silent suffering while he had been across the country on business. A moment he couldn't undo. A moment he relived every night. He held his daughter Ellie tighter. "Daddy," she murmured, sensing his shift. But Adrian was already moving. He turned to the cashier. "Give him the freshest loaf you have," he said firmly. "And 2 hot cocos. Now." The cashier scrambled instantly. Then Adrian knelt in front of Milo, placing a gentle, steady hand on the boy's shaking shoulder. "Can you show me your mommy?" he asked softly. Milo's eyes glistened with tears too cold to fall. He nodded. A single tear slid down his cheek. And with his tiny hand wrapped around Adrian's finger, he led the CEO and the little girl toward the woman lying in the snow. Outside, the cold slapped them instantly. Leia sat slumped, head tilted, her body barely responsive. Her lips were a frightening shade of pale blue. Her breaths were shallow, almost non-existent. Adrian crouched beside her, heart pounding. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder. Her eyes fluttered open. Fear flickered in them. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. We're getting you warm." She tried to speak, nothing came. Her body trembled uncontrollably. The bakery employee rushed out with a blanket. They wrapped her tightly, shielding her from the cutting wind. Then a small voice cut softly through the tension. Ellie stepped forward, holding a half-eaten cookie shaped like a snowflake. "You can have mine," she said sweetly. "Mommy says sharing is love." Leia stared at her, tears filling her exhausted eyes. She pressed a weak hand to her mouth and nodded. Inside, everything changed. The bakery now felt like heaven, warm, fragrant, alive. Fresh rolls steamed on the counter. Bowls of warm soup were placed on a table near the window. Cocoa steamed with marshmallows floating at the top. Adrian helped Leia into a chair. Milo immediately climbed beside her, scooping soup onto a spoon. "Eat too, Mommy," he whispered. "Don't go to sleep forever." The words stabbed Adrian in a place he still believed was irreparably broken. As Leia ate, slowly, trying to steady her trembling hands, Adrian studied the pair in front of him. A tiny boy who had taken responsibility no child should have. A mother whose eyes held both exhaustion and fierce love. When they finished, he leaned forward. "Do you have somewhere to stay tonight?" Leia swallowed, looking down as shame crept across her expression. I'll find somewhere." Adrian didn't push. He simply slid a sleek black business card across the table. "If you need anything," he said softly, "call that number." "Anything?" she whispered. "Yes," he replied. Her fingers hesitated before she picked it up. The trembling in her hands slowed. Before long, the bakery lights dimmed. The employees stacked chairs. But the warmth remained. Adrian gathered Ellie into his arms. Milo curled against Leia's side, full and finally warm. Leia looked at Adrian with soft gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "You didn't have to do all this." He shook his head gently. "Someone once helped me when I needed it most," he said quietly. "I'm just returning what was given to me." A flicker of emotion crossed his face. "My wife," he murmured. "She passed away 2 years ago. Complications after giving birth. She was tired. More than she said. And I..." His voice cracked. "I thought I had more time." Silence settled. Leia's hand trembled as she placed it on the table. "I thought I was the only one who felt that kind of regret," she whispered. "I used to be a preschool music teacher. But then, life piled up. Rent. Bills. Milo got sick. And suddenly, we were living out of a car." Adrian met her eyes. "You didn't fail him," he said softly. "You protected him." His sincerity broke her. Milo lifted his head sleepily. "Can we be Ellie's friends?" he asked. Adrian smiled, warmth touching his eyes. "I think she'd like that." Minutes later, Adrian made a quiet phone call. A room at the Crescent Hotel was prepared for Leia and Milo. Leia shook her head instantly. I can't accept that. You can, he replied gently. Because sometimes, people don't need saving. Just support. Tears filled her eyes again. She nodded. Snow fell quietly as they walked to the hotel, together. The room was warm, clean, safe. Milo ran to the bed and bounced with joy. Leia dropped to her knees beside it, whispering thanks into the silence. That night, Milo curled beside her, his tiny arms wrapped around her shoulders. No skipping dinner, he murmured sleepily. No skipping dreams. She cried softly into his hair, for the first time not from fear, but from relief. Across town, Adrian watched his daughter breathe peacefully in his arms. He opened a photo of his late wife and whispered, "Maybe healing starts when you help someone else breathe again." Morning came gently. Adrian stood at Leia's hotel door with breakfast, warm pastries, fruit, cocoa. Ellie rushed past him to wake Milo, inviting him to see a Christmas tree. Leia hesitated, unsure of stepping into Adrian's world. But Milo's eyes shined with hope. She said yes. Adrian's home was beautiful, but quiet. Too quiet, like a heart that had forgotten how to beat. The Christmas tree sparkled with white and gold lights. Ellie and Milo stood beside it, awestruck. The day was a soft blur of gingerbread cookie decorating, laughter echoing through the kitchen, and flour dusted across everyone's faces. Leia laughed for the first time in ages, cheeks glowing. "Your smile is beautiful," Adrian murmured softly. She looked down, shy. Later, they gathered by the crackling fire. Leia felt a strange, tender peace. Not love. Not yet. But something warm. Dinner glowed with candlelight. Leia wore the deep wine-colored dress Adrian had arranged for her, though he never admitted it aloud. Milo stared at her like she was a miracle. But later, when Adrian stepped aside to take a phone call about preparing an apartment, Leia misunderstood. She thought he was gently preparing to send her away. "You don't have to fix us," she whispered brokenly. Adrian didn't argue. Instead, he walked to the table, lifted a small notebook wrapped in ribbon, and handed it to her. A tiny treble clef shimmered on the cover. Inside, written in neat handwriting, "For the day your music returns." Her breath broke. She clutched it tightly. "No one," she whispered, "has given me something like this in years." Later, when the house was quiet, she sat at an old piano in the corner. Her fingers hovered, then pressed gently. A soft, trembling melody filled the room. Adrian stood in the doorway, listening silently. Not wanting to interrupt the sound of a woman finding a piece of herself again. The next morning, the children presented a drawing for stick figures under a tree. "Our family," Milo had written. "Mommy, me, Ellie, and Mr. A." Leia covered her mouth as tears fell. That night, as the children slept peacefully upstairs and the fire whispered quietly, Leia sat beside Adrian on the couch. The lights glowed softly across her face. "I've spent so long surviving," she whispered. "I forgot what it feels like to be safe." Adrian turned toward her. "And I've spent so long chasing success," he replied, voice low and steady. "I forgot what it feels like to come home." Snow drifted gently outside the window. Inside, something warmer settled into place. Not a promise. Not a future set in stone. But a beginning, real, fragile, beautiful. A beginning they would all remember as the Christmas they stopped being strangers and started becoming something that looked very much like a family. Your story is now fully rewritten, expanded, smoothed, emotionally enriched, polished in narrator style, and closed with a powerful ending. Whenever you have your next story, I am ready instantly.